don't have any graduate degrees associated with what I'm going to talk about. Its interest in most of what I've learned has been in the past few weeks. But unlike Serpentine and a little bit Gabbro, there's just really been a dearth of publications or studies in California on other types of soil endemics. I think there's a few hundred papers published on Serpentine. And so I've been waiting for somebody to come along and really, build their whole career around limestone. I'll tell you why I've gotten interested in it. But so this is, since there really hasn't been much presented at conferences, I just want to try to get people interested, and then as part of the session, tie it back to climate. So kind of why I wanted to find out more was when I first got interested in monkey flowers about 28 years ago, what was then Mimulus rupicola was the only plant that had been described and was a known obligate on limestone. And since that time, Larry Norris had discovered now Erythranthine nerissii. Naomi Fraga kind of formalized our realization that there was something knocking around out in the Mojave Desert on carbonates, and then Dean Taylor really recognized that there was something interesting going on in the eastern Klamath. So being really interested in monkey flowers, I was aware of the importance of limestone. Actually more now, there's really few serpentine obligates within the monkey flowers. And I wanted to acknowledge that there are people who've been very interested in limestone plants, carbonate plants, and I just wanted to, thinking that there could be some of them in the audience, and Dean Taylor, and I talked to Jim Shivak earlier, I don't know if Dana York is here, but so there are people who've been very, very interested and very busy. What I did, went through the consortium of California Herbaria and looked at people who were in their description on their label were recording that there was some sort of carbonate substrate. So there was other people, Jim Moorfield up in the White Mountains has collected, probably 1,000 plants on carbonates, and I'm sure it was very much in the forefront of his mind, but that he's really into the White Mountains and southern Nevada. So that I just really want to acknowledge that there are a number of people, and then Jim Andre, who've also been really, I think, fascinated with biogeography of plants on limestone, and have really done a lot of collecting, probably a lot inside their heads that hopefully will get into publication. And then sort of a dual event. One was sitting in this audience a few years ago, and Susan Harrison gave a talk about serpentine and sort of put up a table of how many endemics there were on serpentine and then other types of soil affinities. And the number for limestone was under 100, and it just seemed pretty low to me. And I don't know why, but I just felt like, well, how come serpentine gets all the interest? Now, furthermore, Hugh Stafford, who's going to be talking tonight, did this great, it's really sort of a data mining exercise utilizing herbarium specimens and expert knowledge to kind of put together a database, a big list of what are the plants that you find on serpentine, which are obligates, which are, very tolerant, which are very sporadic. And I just thought, well, that'd be kind of a cool thing to do for limestone too. And about 6 years ago, Aaron Sims did a search of the CNPS rare and endangered inventory, and anything that listed carbonate substrates as part of the rare plants, he made a list for me. Dick Moe at the Jepson Herbarium did a word search of the whole Jepson manual for anything like gypsum, carbonate, limestone, made a big list of species, and then Roxanne Bittman went through the CNDDB for me and did the same kind of search. And then I've sort of smoothed those all together into a big list. And so these are all primarily rare plants, although some are more common. And over the past 2 weeks, I put about 40 hours into starting to try to at least build this list, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that. But so from Hugh's paper, and this is Art Krupberg, has really been the dean of, as he called them, kooky soils, and in California and the West Coast. And so you kind of have this cline of affinity where some things are only found in one place on a very specific type of limestone or carbonate, and then you have just this weaker where you get to things that are avoiding it. That would be ideal. It'd be nice to be able to do that for all of these carbonate plants, and it's still going to take a bunch of work to do that. And I think now with GIS, we do have some soils data that can give you some idea of the carbonate, calcium carbonate, and other types of carbonates in the soil, and it could be just a strict GIS exercise. Maybe I'll get a chance to work on that. So just to remind you that limestone proper is calcium carbonate. It's generally forming in old seabeds from little organisms that are dying and falling to the ground, and they're in the sweet spot where the calcium carbonate accumulates. And interestingly enough, if as the water gets colder, calcium carbonate suddenly stops precipitating and goes back into solution, and that's where you tend to get sandstones and non-carbonate sedimentary deposits. So don't have time to, there's little nuances of all these different types of carbonates, and plants do tend to favor one versus the other. Caliche, or cliche, never heard anybody pronounce it. And then tooth and travertine are kind of more modern deposits. Some of the limestone and metamorphized limestone is hundreds of millions of years old, goes way back. So this just is what I said about my little data project, where I had a couple hundred names of plants that really had strong indications that they were occurring on limestone or carbonate rocks. And then for each one of those, I looked in the consortium and sort of double-checked where they had been collected, and then formed what I consider for now hypotheses that need to be verified by the experts, the people who've been out on the ground, and continuing to work. So I just began, this sort of a work in progress. So, but what I was able to do is kind of come up with these zones and get, again, this is, the first draft, the rough draft. But what it's really showing, and again, sorry, that this is the Northern California botanist meeting, and some of our richest areas are in Southern California, although what Northern California botanist doesn't like to go down to the deserts in the spring, at least for a trip, while it's still raining and cold up here. So very interesting that the Mojave, and that's where I wasn't able to quickly find a picture to show you the distribution of the actual zone, so the actual deposits. There's a good map for Serpentine, but I couldn't find anything for California. But big terrains, big mountain ranges that are pure limestone and dolomite are out in the Mojave Desert. The whites and Inyos are fairly heavy carbonate soils. Then you start getting more and more into these obscure little pockets, or Dylan referred to ceiling or roof pendants, that old what once was a old seabed that then maybe got raised above ground. When the granite batholiths push up, they just blast that stuff high up into the air, and then it erodes over time. So we're really lucky there's hardly any limestone elsewhere in the state other than these big areas. But so it's really interesting to see that there's these hot spots anywhere where you do have a lot of limestone. You do get specialists forming there, and some of them, the Cushionberry Grade area, I'll show a picture, but high endangerment of the plants that are there. The Dana and Jim Shivak have visited a lot of areas in the southwestern Sierra where you get these isolated outcrops, and I found a lot of cool stuff there. There's probably more work to be done there, and then I'm really interested in when you get north of there, you have all these caves that in Amador, Calaveras County, Murphy's caves, and there is substrate up there, and it doesn't look like it's been heavily botanized. A lot of it's on private land, and then in pretty much every county there is some deposits, and I found this really cool publication that from about 70 years ago that is going through every county and telling you all the different places where you can get limestone, and then very quickly saying how close it is to a railroad. And it's all about whether it can be used as a form of cement. Limestone is one of the key ingredients in cement, but it really is kind of tantalizing in Santa Cruz County and San Mateo County and Contra Costa County. Every county has some form of calcium carbonate or something interesting there. And so I think it'll be fun to kind of look further and see if any plants are popping up there. So here's just figured it's cool to see the area. So this is Northern California's stronghold of metamorphosed limestone, Marble Mountains, and I think there were 11 plants that are only here. White Mountains, Mojave Desert. I just got my 3 minutes, so I'm going to speed up a little bit here. It's really hard. Am I looking at a rock that's 3 inches across? No, I'm looking at Google Earth. This is like 70 miles across, and those white things are essentially cement mines on the backside of the San Bernardino Mountains. This is Cushenberry Grade, and those not too far from the Pebble Plains of Baldwin Lake. And there's 22 limestone high, endemics or high affinity plants there, 4 strict endemics. There's a whole management plan. It's a major area for conservation. Boyden Cave, again, this is Google Maps. That's about 20 miles. That's a fin of limestone that Dana York was strong and bold enough to climb and found a number of interesting species up there. And then this is in the Kaweah River drainage, some marbleized limestone where Larry Norris found this. So I think I'm going to just be repeating a bunch of stuff about how are these particular plants going to fare under climate change. Anything different about them? And I just wanted to make sort of 5 points. And some of this work, we were really lucky at Department of Fish and Wildlife Biogeographic Data Branch, Brian Aneker as a postdoc for a 1.5 years. And we did a climate change vulnerability of rare plants. A lot of this comes from Brian and Melanie and Crystal's work. But first of all, this is just saying that almost any global climate model is going to get hotter. And what's interesting is the amount of change, like the desert doubles down on being hot. The increase in temperature out in the desert is going to be a lot hotter, and the climate, well, a lot of those carbonates are in that area, a lot of the carbonate endemics are out there. So we can't say, well, maybe it's not going to get that much hotter out in the desert. It sure is. So, and I'm colorblind, so I can't really tell what's going on in the moisture map. Global climate models are most variable about what's going to happen with moisture, so we don't really know, especially for some place like at the desert. Is it going to get more monsoonal rain? Is it going to get less winter rain? The models are all over the place. So what a lot of people are doing is spatial distribution modeling, where you look at where a plant occurs now, what's the climate like, do a bunch of modeling, and I think Melanie will talk more about this, and then see where that same bioclimatic envelope is going to be in the future. And I'm going to just give a little bit of caveat about using those models when people aren't being really careful about what they're doing. And one thing is that here's an example of a limestone or carbonate endemic plant, Glossopetalaon spinescens, which is really amazing that it is in the Cushionberry grade, it's in the East Mojave, it's in the North Mojave, it's in the White Mountains, and it's up in the Marble Mountains. It was kind of the best example. It's hitting all of them. So plants move, and they can move, like, think of these as islands. Somehow they got there. You know, it's the bird seed stuck on the bird foot, or maybe it's some other climatic time, but plants were just going. I'm going to now speed up really fast because I'm eating into my question time. But what Brian did something really interesting. Rather than pick one way of looking at whether the range loss was going to expand or get restricted under future climate, he used every climate model he could think of and used it under many different ways. And what this just shows is each bar is a species, and this graph just sort of shows you the amount of variability depending on how you run the model. That's the whole point of this, is for some species, whether it's going to get more territory or lose some totally is dependent on the models. And one thing that's kind of bugged me about a lot of these models is they carve up the state into a checkerboard, and then they look at what each one of those squares has the same temperature and rainfall, so it's presumed to be the same suitability for a plant to be there. But really, these squares are much bigger than topography. And so if you think if your model, my picture here was the size of the square, you can have plants that could be in a north-facing slope, south-facing slope, creek bottom, or out in a meadow, and they're all going to be viewed as having the same temperature regime in the model. And so I think this whole topographic complexity is really back to carbonate plants are generally in these highly erodible landscape facets. And so there tends to be an incredible amount of topographic complexity. They can be in the north-facing slope, they can be in the front. These things are mountains, they can move up and down. So it's different than grasslands. We don't have carbonate grasslands in California. So, and one thing, I'm just going to throw this out. This is the why are there road runners in Mendocino County? Actually, between the last ice age and now, the climate got a lot hotter for a few years. And I got this from the eminent Wikipedia. And but this graph I've seen, this is one of the more conservative, but it actually was a lot hotter for a couple thousand years. Daniel Axelrod wrote about how coast redwoods were restricted and were not doing very well. So I think plants on limestone have been through a really hot period before, so there's some built-in resilience. And they're not able to move around during this time. This just shows the last 4 million years of ice ages, and it's gotten hotter than current conditions a number of times. Again, I think these plants, a lot of them have been on limestone throughout. They've gone through this whole roller coaster ride in situ in the same place. So this is just a sort of hypothesis of mine. And Dylan referred to this a little bit about harsh soils, the azonal, that it's really hard to grow there. The fact these plants have adapted to there as the climate's changing, they're not as, that area becomes climatically suitable for new species to move in, those species aren't going to be as well adapted to live there. So apologies to rush through this. I mean, it's going to be hard, and that is it.